Welcome, everyone. We are Monday and into the gun lap of this conference. I'm Casey Schulberg, the Collier County Waterkeeper, and your host for these daily Waterkeeper podcasts from COP26. I'm pleased to have with us tonight Dr. John Capece, the Kissimmee Waterkeeper, and Chris Wilke, Global Advocacy Manager for the Waterkeeper Alliance. There really are only 3 days left to make progress, as Friday is mostly dedicated to the closing ceremonies. Teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg returned to Sweden after a week in Glasgow, traveling by train to Stockholm. Notice the discrepancy. Boris Johnson took a plane home to London. Ms. Thunberg has been highly critical of the talks, telling young people and protesters at a march on Friday that the COP was now a global North greenwash festival, a 2-week-long celebration of business as usual. She and other protesters feel that national leaders, delegates, the organizers have copped out on their promises. She calls it all blah, 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 which is Swedish for blah, blah, blah. Before we talk about the big news of the day, notably the appearance in town of a former president, I'd like to have Michael share his daily photographic journal from inside the conference.
As soon as I stepped in, the first thing that welcomed me was just this little protest. I honestly don't know exactly what it was about. It was some anti-militarism protest, but what struck me that it was inside the venue. Here is yet another photo from the very same protest. And as I moved a little bit further down the corridors, suddenly there was another protest. So the protesters were blocking half of the corridor, sort of stopping people, blocking the walkthrough. So that's a little bit different comparing to last week when the venue seemed to be completely calm. And so I moved to the Hydro building, and again there was yet another little protest. So I think things are a little heating up there. The second thing that got my attention was that it was really full of people. It seems that the people normally when you register for COP, you either register for the week 1 or week 2 or for both weeks. So it seems that a new group of people arrived for the second week for this week. I saw some new faces, many indigenous people walking around there. I saw some old faces because no offense to John Kerry, but we reported on him last week already, but he walked by as well. Now, when I mention lots of people, this is another example of lots of people. It was just in front of the meeting room where President Obama was going to deliver his speech. I spent in this crowd roughly 20-25 minutes just waiting for Obama to appear, and then I gave up. So apologies for that. So I rather just downloaded a few images of the internet. So Obama was delivering his speech. But I did not really leave all the room completely or the space completely. I just walked around. And what was really interesting, that there were people sitting on the floor in the corridors, and everybody, it seemed like everybody was just watching what Obama was talking about, because the people were forming small groups together and discussing what was actually broadcast live from the meeting room. So people were watching on their phones. People were watching it on their phones and on their laptops or iPads. People were again watching it on laptops, and basically every other person being there was simply watching what Obama was talking about, and it was all broadcasted live. I think this guy got my attention the most because with one hand he was basically listening to Obama on his phone, and with the other hand he was just grabbing for a sandwich. Now, the disadvantage of Obama being in town is that he got a lot of attention, and this is just a quick look in one of the pavilions, in one of the live sessions there. It was basically empty for those 30-40 minutes when Obama was speaking. The whole COP kind of stopped. And this is the last photo of the day. There were many new people. It seems that they were kind of tired, so they took a sleep while being there. We are not there yet. We are getting tired, but we are not there yet. And with being said that, I am turning it back to you, Casey.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Those are always fascinating to see. So, yeah, as you all saw, Obama arrived today, sounding his signature note of optimism and grit. He addressed the crowd for 45 minutes. John Kerry, our environmental envoy, was there. He recited the litany of achievements by the US and other countries. He scolded Russia and China for not attending this year, which rang a bit hollow as America was not only absent for 4 years, but actively hostile to climate change progress. He tried to keep young people from resorting to cynical disenchantment. He exhorted them to get involved with politics and to apply pressure to companies to do the right thing. This also probably fell on young deaf ears, as incremental progress within the system is exactly what drives them crazy. At the end of the talk, he made the point that we, in the developed world, and particularly in the US, will have to cinch our belts. Not only do we need to step up our game, bringing increased funding, technological advances, and political will, but we will need to provide support for those countries that are on the front lines of suffering, island nations, less developed nations. So there will be a cost to be paid. Are we in America really ready to make those sacrifices? Bill Maher pointed out that Greta Thunberg has 13 million Instagram followers, but Kylie Jenner has 279 million Instagram followers. So even young people seem more seduced by lavish consumption than being stewards of climate change renewal. Are we ready to take this on with the urgency required? It'll take a rethink of how we lead our lives, and that is not easy. We need to think big and out of the box. A Marshall Plan for the environment, an environmental Peace Corps. Obama did say that we've done hard things before. Will we meet this moment? I think it's a very real question. So Chris, John, how's it looking from your perspective? I'm a hardwired optimist. Starting week 2, where do you sit on the we will get it done or we are all toast spectrum? Chris, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I just can't go to the we are toast because I don't like the option of where that leads. So I'm inherently optimistic, but I'm growing more cynical by the day, if that makes any sense. I guess I am more in Greta Thunberg's camp than I am in Obama's on this one. I am not getting a feeling of urgency or deep or moves from what I'm hearing. Granted, it is hard to really get your finger on what is happening, because the more you learn about one thing, you realize you're ignoring 99 other things. But the greenwashing meme is pervasive, and it's everybody saying, look at what a good job I'm doing for the environment, but year after year, we fail to reduce our emissions. So I guess I do understand the reluctance to embrace that optimism. My day today started off offsite at the People's Climate Summit. So this was it's a very well organized series of events that is taking place throughout the city on the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And we hosted today was our big event. Waterkeeper Alliance was a co-host, along with Rios to Rivers and Water Climate Trust and a German outfit. I'm going to butcher their name, but it's Gegenströmung is what I believe. It means countercurrent. And I believe those were the primary sponsors of this event, but it was about false solutions. And we were joined also by Survival International, which had a different take on false solutions, but complementary. And then on the stage today were 3 Indigenous activists, as well as someone from the aforementioned German outfit. And we have some folks that we helped bring to the COP, speaking to the destruction of their rivers. And Paul Wilson of the Klamath tribe had a very, very good point that I think is relates to some of the things you're hearing from a lot of the other Indigenous leaders. And that is that 80% of the remaining biodiversity in the world is on land stewarded by Indigenous cultures. And yet, time and time again, the supposed solutions to climate change involve kicking them off of their lands involves more of the same, like in the case of hydropower, flooding free-flowing river systems. Paul was there to bear witness and to tell us about 100 years of destruction on the Klamath River and the toxic algae that builds up behind the dam that's causing fish kills. And the tribe has these 2 small ponds where they're keeping these endangered species of fish alive in water that is drawn from the lake that is somehow filtered enough to keep these fish alive. And they are about to enter into a huge success story, we hope. Those dams are coming down in 2023, and it'll be the largest dam removal project in history, and to restore a free-flowing Klamath River, which is so important to them. And then we had another activist, Fernanda Perrin from Chile, who her watershed was recently flooded on the Biobío River, built a massive dam there that the Chilean president declared her.
I think we lost you, Chris. We lost some audio. Are you still with us?
Well, I'll chime in here until we got him back.
It sounds like you. Yeah.
Oh, all right. There you go, Chris.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm in a guest space tonight, so I apologize for cutting out. Well, in that case, I will wrap up, but I'll just say that false solutions and is a huge issue of discussion here, and this has to work for all people, whatever is decided by the parties.
Well, that segues nicely into what John's going to talk about. He's got some slides he wants to share with you about the economic imperatives of getting any kind of meaningful change to happen, and sort of whether we're going to get it done, or what are the constraints to not getting to where we need to go. So John, share that with us. Thank you.
Well, first, you asked about our degree of cynicism, our state of mind at the present. I've been engaged in this issue since the 80s. I'm just as cynical today as I was then. I'm just as, however, determined as I was then to persevere and do all that I personally can. And I know that you feel the same way. So cynicism doesn't necessarily prevent bold action and intense action. As far as the Greta comments relative to the Obama speech, I think the fact that Michael described everybody as paying attention to Obama I think emphasizes the thirst, the desperation. Everyone's looking for someone to save the day, to be the dramatic leader who can actually mobilize the vast resources of the planet and get us all moving in one direction, because we're sure not doing that right now. We're talking about it. There's lots of good discussions of well-intentioned people at these conferences. There's some that are trying to hammer their round peg into the square climate hole receiver, bringing to the conference and bringing to the issue their personal agenda, their corporate agenda, their existing agenda. Not all of those are bad. These are existing priorities for mankind, for the general betterment of society that they're trying to display in the context of climate change. Others are industries that are trying to extract as much wealth from their existing asset base as they can, while they're redeploying those assets to dominate the next wave of economic activity to address climate change. They've got nothing against renewable energy as long as they own it and they profit from it. So they're slow to transition based upon our economic and our depreciation curves over decades. So that's really at the core of this. Obama's saying, yes, we're moving in the right direction. We're doing some of the things that are necessary, unlike anything we've done before. And that's true. But what we need to do, unlike anything we've done before, is far, far more than what we are doing now and what we're planning to do in the coming years. So Michael, could you put on the first slide for me, please? So I'm going to talk about some of the progress towards confronting this climate crisis from an economic perspective. I'm going to use some solar photovoltaic deployment data as an example, as a case. So slide, please. Climate change investment can be seen as a range of investments, of spending priorities. First, I think, ought to be the issue education and mobilization for the public, because that has been our limiting factor over the decades. We've always known how to solve this problem. We've always had the capability of solving it. We've just never had the will. So we have to get people thinking in a better direction and then acting upon those sentiments. So in addition to education, we've got technology, research and development, whether that's solar, wind, electric vehicles, anything. And then the deployment of those technologies. And the deployment not only is actual construction, putting up solar panels, it's the construction of the factories to produce this infrastructure. And then you've got an emerging priority, which is greenhouse gas removal technology. You'll hear a lot of the scientists saying we're just not on a proper path to reduce greenhouse gases fast enough. Therefore, we are going to have to make significant investments in removing those greenhouse gases. Now, that can be done from the air and from the oceans, and it can be done either through industrial processes or it can be done through nature-based processes, including agriculture. Then there's other costs, resiliency construction and retrofitting of our infrastructure in cities, and then post-disaster reconstruction and relocation of populations. And then there is, of course, the developing nation assistance, if you're looking at it from a national budget perspective. So these latter three aren't going to do anything to lessen the onset of the climate crisis. It's simply grappling with the consequences of our prior inaction. And that will consume an increasingly large proportion of whatever total investment we seek to make in addressing this disaster. So we must deal with and invest in the top options as quickly and as strongly as possible before the secondary costs begin to dominate, and before these secondary implications begin to erode our capacity for investing at all. So then, if we're talking about investment, we need to talk about what is the pool of resources available for that investment. Our GDPs, our productive capacity and output of our nations. And that is traditionally broken down into four major categories: consumption, investment, government expenditures, and net exports. Now, when we're looking for what elements of those can address climate change, you kind of have to drill down into each one. Consumption, you might think of consumption as food and rent and your cars and et cetera, but it can also be education. It can be the money that we as individuals spend on our education, and education is foundational to any set of climate change solutions. So some of the climate change investment can come from that sector. Investment can also include research and development, as well as the construction of the actual factories, new houses, all sorts of investment. And then government, research and development, military, Social Security, Medicare, and then net exports. Net exports aren't always disassociated from climate change priorities. It can be input to other nations. It can be the infrastructure with which they will deal with climate change. So there's, if you're trying to tease out the amount of money that we're spending as the United States or any given nation on climate change investment, it's a pretty tall order. Slide, please. Now, as far as the order of magnitude, during World War II, we started, the United States started with a GDP of about $89 billion, of which 2% was spent on the war, spent on the military. And that was before we entered the war in 1941. By 1941, we were spending 16% effectively on the war, on defense. And then when the war entered its active phases, we were basically spending a third or more, perhaps as much as 40% of our GDP on that effort, on that collective when you look at the infrastructure bill that's been touted as representing a step in the right direction, that's $1 trillion over 8 years. That's $130 billion a year. And that's in effect 2% of what's needed. That's if that whole $1 trillion infrastructure bill was dedicated to climate change. And we know it's not. We know that probably just a fraction of that is devoted to our priorities. Now, if it was entirely devoted, it would only be 2% because that 35% of GDP, given that we have a $21 trillion economy in the United States, would equate to $7 trillion per year. And we're talking about $130 billion a year. So we're talking more than an order of magnitude. So that comparison of Greta's Twitter following, which I guess was what, 20-fold on the sort of the consumption versus the climate change proportions, is roughly what we're talking about here as well. It's a little bit worse. Our budget situation is significantly worse than that, but it gets you in the ballpark. Slide, please. So here, if you're looking at what countries are currently investing in research and development, and research and development includes a wide range of consumer products development and so on. So, but then also the consumption and other investment, other portions of our GDP can also be in the climate sector. So we can use the R&D budget of a nation as a surrogate for perhaps what it's investing in this climate crisis. And if you look across say the G20, or actually the entire suite of nations, you find that overall about 2% of the global economy is spent on research and development. There are a few outliers, or a couple of outliers that spend significantly more. Notable are Israel and South Korea. Each spend between 4 and 5% of their GDP on research and development. But 2% is a good ballpark number. And you can see how if you do not have the United States and China working together and investing heavily in this sector in research and development and deployment of climate mitigating technologies, we're going to lose this battle absolutely and completely. And as far as which nations need to be leading the way, when you take the top 20 nations, as far as when ranked by R&D development, you get about, 83%, 93% of all research and development in the world, just 20 nations. These are the nations that basically got us into this mess and really have the responsibility to get us out. Then you add another 10 nations down to maybe 31, Indonesia, and you've got 90% of the current R&D development. That does not mean that the other nations don't have an extremely important role to play. Just because their economies and their cultures are not monetized to the extent that the Western nations are, doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to contribute. For example, when you look at India down the list on at 1.1% of global R&D, we in the United States know that our friends from India who come to the United States drive so much of our research and development. So every nation, because it has human resources, has the potential to play a critical role in this battle. But as far as spending money on the task, it has to be these top 30 nations, and they have to move beyond this 2% research and development up to 10% with the balance of the 30% to get us to the 40% for total investment against climate change crisis. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take an order of magnitude more on research and development, and it's going to take an order of magnitude more on deployment through investment of our capital. So slide, please. So the example I wanted to use is sort of a lag factor that's involved even with something like solar photovoltaic. So I went on the internet and I found a spreadsheet, I found a table that showed by year since the 90s of the total deployed gigawatts of photovoltaic. And then I proceeded to make some assumptions based upon other data that I found and developed this spreadsheet. So slide, please. What it shows here is since 1995, we've had a dramatic increase in the rate of solar deployment. It really started taking off in about 2010, and the vertical gaps between those blue diamonds represents the amount of photovoltaic infrastructure deployed in any given year. So you can see that the spacing between these diamonds is increasing dramatically. That's the exponential increase in our capacity to both produce and install photovoltaic infrastructure. So slide. Then once you make some assumptions about how much each gigawatt of infrastructure is able to produce in electricity each year, you can combine that with what's called this this payback period, this energy payback break-even time. And as I mentioned yesterday, back in the 90s, it was at about 10 years. It took 10 years for a photovoltaic panel to generate enough electricity to make up for everything that went into its manufacture and deployment. Then I made some assumptions as far as how we've gotten from that 10-year payback period to the current, what is touted as about 9 months. And that's for the most advanced technologies. So that doesn't mean that the full portfolio of solar being deployed is going to be deployed at that 9-month payback period. Instead, you're going to have factories that are producing photovoltaic technology from 10, 20 years ago still operating. So there's going to be an aggregate number that represents the payback period of the full set of infrastructure deployed in any given time. So these 4 curves represent assumptions as to how that aggregate number is declining over the years. And I believe that the 2022, the green line, is probably most accurate, and it may even be generous. But in the coming months, I'm going to explore that more and see what research is out there that addresses this. Some preliminary investigations didn't really find much in the literature to address this. So based upon these 4 assumptions, these 4, basically they are technology curves as far as our improvement in production technology for solar photovoltaic. So slide, please. Now, what happens is with these curves is as you ramp up with early technology and begin to deploy it in large numbers, you're actually making the greenhouse gas problem worse. As those curves go up, in effect, the deployment of solar is increasing the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, not decreasing. Only when you've driven down the payback time by improving your technology and then scaling up your deployment capacity will you start to achieve benefits. So if we take the 2022 curve as being accurate, it looks like around 2017 we might have reached a peak impact period as far as making the problem worse with our solar. And then we began to decrease it, and only in 2022 will we actually start realizing net benefits from solar photovoltaic. Now, of course, this representation is subject to improvement of all the assumptions and numbers I use to produce the spreadsheet, but it serves as a case study. If we're going to develop new technologies in a range of areas to address the greenhouse gas problem, they're going to follow similar curves because we're going to be learning how to do better in the technology, how to fabricate it better, fundamental science improvements in the technologies that we use. So we have to get started in a massive way with huge investments on research and development because they take time to actually yield results. It takes time to produce them. It takes time to learn how to do it right. So it points out that whereas Obama talks about what we've done, and this solar is an example, we're finally reaching a net improvement from that technology. It's also true that we are more than an order of magnitude below what we need to be doing right now as far as investment in taking on this challenge. Slide. So this is a slide we used earlier in our student presentation. Study hard, protest harder. I think from an economic perspective, it could be said we need to invent hard and deploy harder. So we need to create new technologies, and we need to get these improved, and we need to get them deployed widely throughout our society. So Casey?
That's amazing, John. Yeah, that's amazing. As an eye opener. I mean, the one thing we didn't talk about on federal R&D is the aid from the private sector, and there was an announcement that I think 450 of the top companies in the world or in the U.S. Had decided to devote $1 trillion to exploring solutions, which equates to about 40% of all the assets in America. So that should help. That should supplement the paltry efforts on the federal side. So that may help get us there, and all kind of technological solutions. You know, we're learning so much year to year. Our technology is improving year to year. I know 10 years ago we didn't have the capacity to measure the climate change to the extent that we do today. So I'm hoping that some of these companies will come online and try to, you know, bolster our efforts. But that was an amazing presentation, John. I learned so much. Chris, do you have Chris? We might have lost Chris. Yeah, I think he'll probably be back on the phone. So he's there. Chris is there. Okay. So Chris, did you want to comment at all on what John just showed us?
No, I learned an awful lot by looking at that, but it does. I don't have much words of wisdom to add, other than it does show you how these investments do take a while to pay off. So it's something that's not always discussed.
Yeah, and the idea that the solar industry had basically been carbon positive until just now, which is obviously a symptom of it having a very small portion of the market. So there's no economy of scale. And when a new technology comes out, it's more expensive. So those costs are being driven down. And it's interesting that we're now just turning the corner on that, where it's actually going to be carbon negative instead of carbon positive. So that I learned that as well. So
another angle on this is, you know, so often the people that don't seem to want to fully engage this issue, they'll say, oh, technology is going to take care of it. You know, the scientists are going to pull a rabbit out of a hat and save us all. Well, yes, that can be done, but it doesn't just happen. You have to invest in it. It takes huge determination and effort, and it takes decades of effort, because you have to start with the education of the young people. You have to train these scientists and engineers and social scientists to be able to have careers that achieve the changes over many years and decades. So people who say science is going to save us without doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down on the investment are really just, as you said, copping out.
I mean, what we were talking about earlier today was you suggested maybe at the border, anyone who's interested in spending a career in environmental work should just be allowed in, and right. And you do it like a Peace Corps. They have to spend 4 years working. They'll get paid probably less than they would, you know, in other domains, other sectors. But we would welcome them if they're going to apply themselves for a period of time to this effort in any kind of spectrum. I mean, any kind of, you know, we'll need everything. We'll need secretaries, and we'll need scientists, and we'll need you know, gophers, and we'll need field scientists. And so that's an interesting idea. And since, you know, we should be reactivating that visa for experts to come to the U.S., which
we have that. But yeah, even non-experts, I mean, people that are young, they're willing to devote a career toward it, to get the education in the proper direction. I mean, we have programs where people with money can buy their way into the United States through an investment. Why not investing your own commitment and life's work to this? That's of comparable or even greater value. Similarly, we have programs that favor those foreign individuals who join our military. you know,
Yeah.
and they get preferential treatment on citizenship. Why not do this for the climate?
All right. Well, we're gonna send that up the tree and see if we can get. So our interview for tonight is a woman that I really have come to admire, Rashema Ingraham, and I know that Chris has been doing a lot of work with her. So before we start that interview, John or Chris, can you just tell us about the work you're doing there in the Bahamas and how you're supporting her brave efforts?
Thanks, Casey, and I'm glad to hear from Rashema. I haven't actually seen this interview yet. Rashema and I and some other allies, Kasarina from the organization called Brief, we formed a coalition about a year and a half ago called Our Islands, Our Future. And the point of this coalition is to support local efforts in the Bahamas to oppose offshore drilling there. The Bahamas is not an oil producing nation and never has been. There have been a few test wells drilled over the years. There's hints of oil that gets the investors interested. And we were looking down the barrel of a offshore drilling exploration proposal last year. And the thing that you need to understand is that offshore drilling is exploration for offshore oil is just as dangerous as, if not more so, than pumping oil. Because when you're exploring, you don't know what kind of pressures you're going to get. In the Deepwater Horizon spill of the Gulf of Mexico was an exploratory well. And that's what they were facing. We formed this coalition and we fought against this, very successful in getting in the local media and making it a national issue. We formed a website. It's called ourislandsourfuture.org. We had a petition that ended up just shy of 100,000 signatures. And this is in an island nation of just over 300,000 people. Not that they were all local residents, but you get an idea of the scale of the interest in this. But the thing that we were looking at there is that the oil that was at stake was quoted as being up to 1.4 billion barrels. And I decided to do some calculations. I'd be happy to run it by you, John, to see if you can verify my calculations. But I calculated the carbon footprint of 1.4 billion barrels of oil using an EPA number of, I think it was 0.43 metric tons per barrel, because the amount of carbon emitted into the atmosphere weighs more than the fuel. A lot of people don't understand that. So a ton of coal creates more than a ton of carbon pollution because it is pulling out of the atmosphere. It's pulling oxygen out of the atmosphere and other things. So what we ended up with was the carbon footprint of this, if this oil field was fully exploited, would equal the entire carbon footprint of the Bahamas and 18 other Caribbean island nations. Skipping the largest ones like Cuba and Dominican Republic, but the carbon footprint of 18 nations would essentially be sucked out of the ground over 20 years. And that was the carbon footprint over 20 years of those same island nations. So, and it's not even the biggest oil field out there, but it is a massive oil field, and we are fighting hard to stop it from entering in development. And I think we may be at a good place here because the licenses have expired. Rashema is probably going to tell us a little bit about this, so I don't want to spoil her story. But I'll be happy to watch it and take other observations on the other side.
Yeah, and we with the Florida Waterkeepers, which is a regional grouping of all the 15 waterkeepers in Florida, we've discussed the prospect of oil rigs off the coast of the Bahamas, because it's a stone's throw from where we are. Well, you might have to put it in a slingshot, but it's really not very far from where we are. So we're, if there were a spill, it would definitely affect the east coast of Florida.
Yeah, we actually looked at spill models, and there were some models that suggested it would just be a straight shot right at Miami. if there was a spill. Like the Bahamas might not even get the worst of it, like Florida would. And there's a prohibition on offshore drilling off the coast of Florida.
Yes.
It was already existed and it was extended by Trump, believe it or not. And were it not for the islands, the land of the Bahamas, the location of this well would be within that area of moratorium. But with international boundaries, when you go out 200 miles for an exclusive economic zone, if there's another country in there, you just split the difference. You don't still go out 200 miles because you'd be overlapping the other country.
So let's hear from the interview with Rashema, and then we'll come back and Chris get your thoughts about what we heard. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Rashema Ingraham, who is the Executive Director of Bahamas, of the Waterkeepers of Bahamas. Rashema, tell us a little bit about your beautiful nation and what you're up against.
Just to give everyone a little bit of perspective, but before I do, I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story, as well as encourage others to tell their story. So this platform is really appreciated. And when you think of the Bahamas, we are in the West Indies. We're right off of the eastern coast of Florida, and many Bahamians will say that it is one of the blessed countries of the world. We are an ocean nation. We have 100,000 square miles, right? So it seems like so much. But when you think about land mass, only 5,000 square miles of that is land. So the rest is ocean, and we are definitely an ocean nation. A lot of our richness, a lot of the great explorations and adventures of the Bahamas can be found below the sea. We are one of the countries in the world that has a shark protection or a shark sanctuary. And we've seen where that has really helped to really diversify the populations of the fish below sea. And so that sounds great, right? But then when you think about the other side of it, or the flip of the coin, we are right in that hurricane belt. And since 1999, we have really been hit every year or every other year by very intense storms, storms that would be Category 3 or above. And so for Florida, I think one of the memorable experiences of a hurricane would be in 1992 with Hurricane Andrew. For us, that really started in 1999 with Hurricane Floyd. Even though we would have experienced Hurricane Andrew, we really got the brunt of the forces of hurricanes in 1999 with Floyd, and then Wilma, Jane Francis, Matthew, and in 2019 with Hurricane Dorian. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about what Dorian has done to us. And a lot of you have heard because this was really the first time on record where we've had so many people who have died and have been found dead. And then we have so many hundreds of people who are still missing. And that's been unheard of in the Bahamas. We have been known as resilient people who can weather any storm. But Hurricane Dorian really showed us that we need to start to change the way we approach storms, and we address them, and we are prepared for them. And so we are really hopeful, and hopeful is such a loose term right now, that you have the nations of the world and their leaders who are now at COP where you are, really do something for us who are here today, but really put in solutions that will help the children who will be coming in the world later. Because the hurricanes, if we don't either get to net zero or we don't reduce by 2%, will really be stronger. And maybe there will be not only a category 5, but a category 6.
Yeah. So Rashema, you have a flourishing tourist industry, you have a financial services industry, and you have abundant sun and wind. So I would imagine that no one is thinking about putting an oil rig off your coast.
It seems like only a nightmare, and when you wake up the next morning, that will just be an afterthought. But no, it's a reality for the people of Bahamas, where you have an oil company that is looking at an already climate change nation as the perfect spot for an oil exploration. And I mean, it's embarrassing for them to even speak about this at this time, when the world is trying to move away from fossil fuel energies, where the leaders of the world are saying, let's all come together, either get to net zero or find a way to really handle this climate change issue. And then on the side of you, you have like a untamed child saying, no, let's drill for oil. And the perfect place to drill for oil is in the waters of the Bahamas that's already experiencing sea level rise, and in the waters of the Bahamas where you have a fishing industry and a tourism industry with over 100,000 people employed out of the 380,000 people that live there. Let's go there and let's drill for oil. We don't know if oil exists, but we'll find out. So it's all an experiment, and we'll use the people of the Bahamas as our lab rat.
Oh boy, yeah, and it seems like we're getting sort of mixed messages from your prime minister. On the one hand, he came to COP and he addressed and made nice, beautiful pronouncements about his being an environmental advocate, and on the other hand, he seems to be in favor of the prospect of offshore drilling. Is that correct, Rashema?
So I'll tell you this, and I don't want you to give a confused look on your face, but when the current Prime Minister Davis was in opposition, he said publicly that he was in favor of environmentally friendly oil drilling. We still don't know today what that means.
Yeah, that is a stumper. That is puzzling. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is going to go with him forever unless he really shows us that he is here for the people of the Bahamas. And so while he may have been in opposition and said that crazy statement, just recently he spoke before the United Nations Assembly, and he also spoke before COP, the COP Assembly as well, and pleading with the people present that the Bahamas needs help, and that we are going to eventually become climate refugees if we don't all come together to address this issue. And his words were that we are out of time. And so for you to use such strong words that we are out of time, because we are, and things can shift in a matter of days, as the storm intensifies. We're losing a lot of our coastal areas. We've lost a lot of our mangroves. A lot of our corals have been hit by the stony coral tissue disease. We're seeing it where warming waters are really depleting our ecosystems. We're seeing where hurricanes are ripping apart our mangroves and our seagrass. And yes, we are out of time, but as we are out of time, we as Bahamians need you to say that you are with us when we ask for a ban on oil drilling in our waters.
Yeah, I mean, we should absolutely not be in imagining any new oil drilling. We need to be stepping away and sunsetting the current existing rigs and not adding more to the problem. So I totally agree with that. Is there something that we can do? Is there a petition that you'd like us to sign, or have our followers sign, or a website you want to direct us to to help you in your efforts?
Yeah, there definitely is. And so just as an introduction on where that petition may be, for the last year and a half, Waterkeepers Bahamas has been partnering with BREEF, Bahamas Reef Environmental Education Fund, as well as Waterkeeper Alliance and their Global Advocacy Department, and forming a coalition known as Our Islands, Our Future. Powerful, right? These are our islands, and it's our future, and it's our children's future. And that coalition has had a petition on change.org, or it can be found if you use www.stopbahamasoildrilling.com. And the petition really asks the Prime Minister of the Bahamas to reconsider any negotiations of allowing any licenses to continue for oil drilling, or the renewal of those licenses, as well as to move forward with a permanent ban on oil drilling. And you have a cabinet that really can get this done. And so as much as we ask, and as much as we do our own studies and economic analysis and gathering of grassroots people, we need your support as well, because Bahamians don't want it. The 150 international and national supporters who have signed on to Our Islands, Our Future don't want it. So if you're thinking about the utilitarianism scheme of things, where the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest amount of people, the greatest amount of people are saying we don't want oil.
Well, we shall support you in that. We'll put the links on the video, on the interview. And so we thank you, Rashema. We thank you for letting us know a little bit about your beautiful corner of the world. We're encouraging people to come visit you and learn more about the Bahamas, and to support you in your attempts to stop this oil drilling. This is really, really important. So thank you very much, Rashema, for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing from you and working with you for the next week and into the future.
Yes, thank you so much. Continue to do well.
Thank you. All right. So we heard a little bit from Rashema and Chris. Anything you want to comment on what we've heard and her work? Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you go.
I guess the most interesting thing for me about this fight, and we have been fighting for over a year and a half on this oil drilling proposal, was just what, I'm just going to say it, what bozos this company was that we were going up against. They really did not know what they were doing. They produced an environmental impact assessment, an EIA, which was just cut and paste from other EIAs elsewhere. And it was 600 pages long, and it was just garbage. There was some reference to animals that weren't even in the Bahamas, and they listed species at risk, and they basically just calculated a bunch of things, cataloged a bunch of species, but didn't actually say what they were going to do to protect them. And their spill response plan was just terrible. They talked about assets stationed in Louisiana and Dubai, and you can't use that to respond to an oil spill. And it was just crazy. But they threw up a 3,000 page environmental management plan and a 600 page EIA, and like basically forced a government that doesn't really know how to regulate oil drilling to swallow that. And then they were bragging to their shareholders about what a great deal that they were getting in the Bahamas, that they'd have to pay a lot more to drill somewhere else, essentially, and did not have an adequate spill response plan. We were really highlighting every one of those things along the way, and it was gradually turning opinion until we had a socially responsible investment bank, Lombard Odier, decided to just pull out. Due to shareholder pressure, which we were talking about earlier, and that was their largest institutional funder. And when they actually went to drill, it could be that they were not able to afford to drill deep enough to actually find the oil. So that actually could have helped us dodge that bullet. But boy, if we were facing an oil major, I don't know. I mean, those would be bozos too. But I would worry a lot more about going up against an Exxon or a Total or things like that, companies like that. And unfortunately, that's what some of our other allies are facing off the coast of Senegal, as we heard last week. And they are much further along. They're ready to begin exploitation in 2023. So I'm worried about what that may bring.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, we're kind of fortunate that there were such blunders in their dossier. I guess they just assumed if it was 600 pages long, it would look credible. But I'm glad you poked holes in it.
Well, I'm convinced what their plan was all along. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm convinced what they were trying to do all along was poke a hole in the ground, find oil, and then sell the company. And so you have these layers in the finance system that are kind of like that, where there's not any production that's really realistically planned, but yet they are doing these dangerous activities and subjecting the local population to substantial risk.
Mm-hmm. So that's great. That's great. Chris, you want to tease a little bit what we're going to see tomorrow?
Oh, yes, thank you. Tomorrow is going to be a big day for our Rivers for Climate Coalition and our push against the false solution of hydropower. You're hearing it here first because our press release is coming out tomorrow morning. We're going to be delivering a declaration to the United Nations. I made contact with the office today. Thank you for the tip, John. I was able to find the desk in the office and they've agreed to accept it, our declaration, and they told me how to enter it in online so that it would be entered into the official proceedings of the COP. So we're really excited about that. And we will hopefully have video and more to report on that tomorrow, as we have our declaration signed by 350 organizations in 69 countries.
It's been a busy week for you, Chris. You've gotten a lot done, and you're not done. So we really we salute you, and we're looking forward to that tomorrow, to being with you and documenting it a little bit. So, and John, fantastic input with that information. I'm still sort of registering it in my mind. So we look forward to more of those. That would be great. So. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for joining us, those of you who are tuned in. And we will be with you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time and 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time tomorrow. So thank you very much.